Our PHP scripts are getting more sophisticated as time goes on. We can now connect to the database and query and return data and serve it up to the user in the browser. However, the user themselves is rather left out in the cold at this point. So far there's been no user interactivity. That is to say that the user hasn't been able to have any control over what data is served back to them. In this chapter we're going to change that. We're going to look at ways to allow the user to input data which we're going to use to query the database using a simple search feature that we're going to write as a PHP script. We're also going to look at ways to deal with invalid input by the user, and we're going to look at how we can write to the database using our PHP scripts to update or add records to the data that already exists. We're also going to allow for the user to upload data to the server. Let's start out by writing the HTML page which is going to launch our little search engine that we haven't written yet. This is going to be a very standard HTML page. We're going to have a title. We're using the Vinyl Dealers database as the example here. So our ostensible purpose of these pages is to allow the user to search for a particular record shop by inputting a name or part of the name, and then our PHP script is hopefully going to return a list of shops that match that criteria. So we're just going to have a simple header there and leave a line break, and then we're going to have a form. This is just an HTML form, and what this form is going to do is it's going to call results by name PHP, and this is what we're going to call the script that will contain our very simple search feature. And what that script is going to do is return the results that it's found from the input that the user is going to input on this HTML page. We also need to specify the method, and in this case we're going to say post. We could equally use get, and because we're dealing with such a small amount of data here, it's simply personal preference. The difference being that get will append the variables to the end of the page name here, and post will send them under a separate HTTP header. But it won't make very much difference at present. So here we're going to put some instructions for the user. Then a line break, and then we're going to use a little input box. And what this part here means is this is going to give a name by which the variable can be known to the script that we are going to call. Confusingly, it's the name of the record shop that we're going to search for. So we're calling the name element of this input box name, but the reason for that is that it's the name of the record shop that we're looking for. And it's going to be of type text. Another line break. And then down here we're going to need a button So submit button for the whole form, and we're going to write the word search on that button. And that's our form. Close the form tag, close the body tag, and close our HTML tag, and there's our page. Let's take a look at that in the browser. We'll have to save that. And let's save this as search by name HTML, because there's no PHP involved in this form itself. It's just going to call the PHP using the form. Let's have a quick look at that in the browser. So there's our search form, and we're going to be able to type in whatever record shop we're looking for here. We'll type in some text here and hit the search button. Now at the moment we haven't made our PHP script with the search feature in, so we can try and search, but it's not going to work. In our next movie we're going to make the PHP script, and hopefully we'll be able to allow the user to search for their favorite record shop. Now we're going to write the resultsbyname.php script, and that's going to handle the search function itself. Let's open up a new text file, and first of all let's simply write a couple of lines of PHP that make sure that the variable is being passed that we think it is from the last page. Let's just try and echo that variable to the browser. If we take a look back at our HTML page here, we'll see that when this form is executed, it's this input that sends data to the PHP script, and the name of the variable is name. So if you pop back to our PHP script and try to echo name, then we'll be able to test to see that the HTML file is acting the way we expect it to. So let's call that resultsbyname.php, and let's try to run that script now from here. So if we type in some data here and hit the submit button, as we can see, the data that we entered was successfully echoed to the browser by the PHP script. Well, that's all very well, but it's not doing what we wanted to do yet. Let's take that out and we'll create this script. Now this script is going to be embedded within HTML. And we're going to make this look quite similar to the last page in format. Need to put a heading there and a line break. And now we're going to start the PHP that's going to be embedded within this page. This is going to work in a very similar way to the example in the last chapter. We're going to connect using the MySQL connect function, and then we're going to select the database using the MySQL select DB function, and then we're going to define our query. Now this is going to be a little different because we're doing something rather more complex than simply getting all the records from shops, which is what we were doing in the last chapter. This time Well, for a start, let's limit the fields that we're taking back from shops. So instead of selecting star from shops, let's say we select only certain fields, in this case shop's name and the phone and their email address and the website, just enough for the user to be able to contact whatever shops they get as their search results. Now our query is starting to go over the extent of the line that we can see in our text editor. So let's simply pop that onto the next line with an indent. As I explained earlier, PHP will treat this as all one line because there's no semicolon right here. Until it hits a semicolon, it treats everything as just one line. So after that part of the SQL string, we're going to specify which records it's going to return. The way we do that is we're going to specify that it's going to return only records where the name field is like this pattern, and this pattern is going to be our name variable. These quotes look a little tangled because we need to use quotes within the SQL string, but we need to use the kind of quotes that PHP won't interpret as the closing of its own string. So we use single quotes, just so the two technologies don't get mixed up. And we need to close the string so that we can put in the variable name, so that this little bit of text that I've highlighted here is interpreted as the value of the variable name rather than just as $NAME, which wouldn't be very useful. Something else we're going to add here is some wildcard characters, which for SQL is the % sign. We're going to put those inside the SQL inverted commas, but outside the PHP ones. And what these % signs are going to do is it's going to make the query find all instances where this variable is found anywhere within this field. So any number of characters could come before or after this, the value in this variable. So that the user will be able to match, for instance, all shops whose names contain the letter E, if they so wished, or all shops whose name contain only part of their name, rather than having to specify the whole name. So that's our SQL string, and then we need to run that string using the MySQL query command, and then we're going to run through the records that this query finds in a very similar way to the way in which we did in the last chapter. We're going to fetch an associative array for every row of the results, and then we're going to use list and each functions to go through each of the columns. This works in exactly the same way as the last chapter. One thing that we're going to add, and this is just a design thing, is we're going to put a bold tag to either side of the actual field value. This is just to make the values stand out from the names of the fields, so that it's easier to read. And then we're going to put a line break at the end there, in between each field, and then we're going to put an extra line break in between each record. Then we need to close both those while loops with the curly brackets, and we'll need a close PHP tag as well. another line break, and let's put in a very simple little hyperlink. And all this is going to do is allow the user to go back and do another search once they've read their results, if they so wish. All that remains to close the body tag and the HTML tag, and let's save our script. And we'll test this in the browser. We go back to search by name HTML. Let's test this out by entering some data here. So let's try the word record, because a lot of these record shops contain the name record within the name. Now let's see. Explosive records being returned, rhythm records, deeper beat records, and bleep bleep records. All of these contain the text record within their names. So we can conclude that our search script is working pretty well. We haven't tested it. We're going to go on to that in the next movie. But it's doing pretty much what we want it to do. If we take a look at the source of this page, then as we can see, all it returns is the data. None of the PHP script is seen by the browser, as I've explained before right in chapter 1, but it's useful to see a good example of that. In our next movie, we're going to look at the things that are wrong with this script and the ways in which, by entering some invalid data, we can end up with some unexpected and unwanted results. Now that we've installed our simple search feature within our PHP script, and we've got it to work, the first thing we should do is to try and get it to go wrong. Because we shouldn't expect our users to do what we would like them to do with our product. We should expect them rather to do the most illogical things that they're capable of doing. For instance, instead of entering any data within the field here before they hit the search button, it's quite possible that they'll enter nothing and just hit the search button anyway. If they do that at the moment, with the way our PHP script is now, it's going to return every record in the database. Now this is a problem. Logically, if the user enters nothing at all as the search term, then the PHP script should return no results. Let's see why it's doing the exact opposite. When the string variable name is evaluated, if the variable is empty, then the SQL string here is essentially saying select all of these fields from the shops table where the name field is like wildcard and then nothing and then wildcard. Effectively anything at all. So our SQL string is returning every record in the table, in the shops table. There's a very simple way to get around this, and that's to use an if condition and a logical not operator and our name variable. And what that will do is, if our name variable is empty, then this condition will be true, and whatever we put in here will be run. Otherwise, it will ignore the if condition. So let's put the error message in here. And then we'll want to exit so that none of those results are shown. Let's try it and see if that works. If we go back to our HTML page and enter with nothing at all, as we can see, the error message is brought up. However, this time we're missing our hyperlink that should come beneath anything that's delivered by the PHP script. Reason for that is that this exit command completely ends the PHP script and anything that comes after it. Now, if the user has received no results from their search, they are in fact more likely to want to go back to the search page, but they're not receiving this option at the moment. What we can do to remedy this is to take it off from the HTML and include it as a string variable at the beginning of our PHP script, surround that in quote marks, and then we can use it wherever we want within our script. One thing to look out for is if we're enclosing HTML such as this as a string variable, then these double quotes will completely mess up PHP's syntax, because it will see the first double quote here as the outside of this string variable, and then it will look at that as closing the quotes rather than surrounding the hyperlink. So we use single quotes, very similarly to the way we use single quotes here in our SQL string. We can now use our link variable wherever we want to output that message. And we can put it at the end of the script as well. We may want to include a couple of extra line breaks to keep things tidy and readable. So let's save that and return to the browser. This time, when we enter an empty search, we get the error message and we also get the link to go back. So we can see that this is a flexible way of including the piece of HTML that we want to write in different places. There are different ways to do this, but this is probably the easiest one given what you've learned so far from this training material. Now, other things can go wrong as well. For instance, we used the record example as something we could search for within the names of the record shops. Now, if the user enters record just like that, then they're going to get the results they expect. However, they put in a few spaces after the search term that they're wanting to look for, they're going to get nothing. Now, that is going to be a problem because the user is not going to think in terms of the PHP script searching for record, the text record followed by 5 spaces. They're just going to think, I put in record and hit the search button, and why did I get no results? Now there's a very handy little PHP string function called trim, and that strips off any white space from around a string variable. So if there's any tabs, spaces or line breaks around our name variable, then they will be removed, and we need to set name to this new value, which is the trimmed version of itself. If we save that and go back to our browser and type in record again followed by a few spaces, this time it's going to return the 4 record shops that contain the word record within their name. So that's functioning correctly now. One problem when we looked for record before with the spaces before we put our trim in and it returned no results, you may have noticed that there was no message that was returned to say that no results have been found. Let's try again with some nonsense data. We type in some garbage there, hit search, and this, although we've still got the link here, is kind of ambiguous because there's no explanation as to why there's no results. Let's go back to our PHP script and find a way of letting the user know that their search has been unsuccessful. Straight after the query has been run, we can use a condition, an if condition, to test how many rows has been returned from the query. We can use a PHP function called MySQL num rows, and that takes one argument, which is the result of the query, and we're going to say equals 0. So if no rows at all have been returned from the query, i.e. nothing at all has been given back as a result, then we can say sorry, no matching results, or something of that nature. We can also put the hyperlink in there, and then exit the script. Let's save that. So, MySQL num rows is the function that we're using here. Let's type in some nonsense, try it out, and as we can see, a much more user-friendly result if no matches are found. So that's made our search script a little more intelligent and allowed for some more erratic user input, which is very important. The search feature that we just built doesn't take advantage of the structure of our example database. In this movie, we're going to build another simple search feature that allows the user to search by the genre of music that they're looking for, rather than by the name of the shop. First of all, let's save our scripts. Search by genre.html, so we're saving copies of both of these, and results by genre.php. Now, what we're going to have to change here is, first of all, we're going to change the PHP script that the form is going to call, and then we're going to have a different instruction for the user. In this case, and then we're going to have to change this field. Now, we could simply, theoretically, change name to genre and run a search like that. However, there are two reasons why this is a bad idea. One is that if we're going to search by name of a musical genre, then the user is very likely to spell a genre in a way that we don't expect them to, or use a different kind of word or term for the musical genre than the one that we've stored on the database, and so we'll get no good results from that kind of a search. Another reason, if we take a look at our MySQL database, we'll have a look from the MySQL prompt. We're going to use the Vinyl Dealers database and have a look at the genres table. We can see that a number, a unique ID number, is stored beside each genre and the name. And if we take a look at the shop genres table, where the relationship between the genres and the shops is stored, we'll see that it's all stored purely as numeric data. This is to avoid precisely the kind of confusion that I just referred to with different spellings of genres or different names for essentially the same thing or overlapping categories. We can avoid all that kind of thing by storing the data numerically. Now the implications for our HTML page is that we don't want text data of any kind. We want numeric data. We're going to have to achieve that by an option field, a select field, rather than a simple input field. So it's going to be genre is going to be the variable that is going to be outputted to the results by genre.php script. And then we're going to have a number of different options that the user can select. And each of these options is going to output a numeric value to our PHP script. But the user is going to see the text, which is what they will need to be able to make their choice. Let's indent those options for clarity and close the select tag. That's about it that we need to change on our search by genre.html. Let's take a look at our results by genre.php script, and we'll need to change quite a lot here. To start with, the hyperlink that will take the user back to the search page needs to be changed to reflect the different kind of search they're doing, so that they get sent to the right page. We won't need to trim any white space from the data because it's numeric data that's coming through and in a format that we've specified. We're also going to have to change the instances of the genre name variable to the genre variable. And then the next thing that we're going to change is our query. We're not interested in the name of the shop, so we can take this out, and we're going to replace that with a slightly different syntax. It's not just the shops table we're concerned with, it's the shops table in relation to the shop genres table. So we'll use an inner join there on shop ID equals shop genres shop ID. That will assure the SQL string that it's dealing with the right entries in the shop genres table. And finally, crucial phrase here is where the genre ID is associated with that particular record shop, the genre that the user has requested is included within the shop genres table. Now that's all we need to test out our new search feature. So let's go to our browser and do just that. Try search by genre.html, and as we can see, we've got 3 choices there, and the PHP script returns a number of record shops to us. Now this is not every record within the database. This is only the records that are flagged as being associated with the genre that we specified. in this case techno. I've left out a line break in the script, which is why there is the search button is right up next to the select field, but that doesn't make any functional difference. Now there is a problem with our search-by-genre.html file. Say if we want to add a genre at a later date, add a new kind of genre to the database that we hadn't thought of before. We're going to have a problem because we're going to have to not only update the database, but update this HTML page. Furthermore, it doesn't really make sense for me to copy manually 16 different options from the database when, given that this is a dynamic site that we're trying to create, we should be able to pull that data from the database and use it to create the page. And that's exactly what we'll do. Instead of using this rather clunky arrangement, we're going to use some PHP. Now it's very important that we change the name of our HTML page so that it will be interpreted as PHP. So our search-by-genre.php page, we should just pop over here quickly while we've made that change and change the hyperlink there to reflect that. Now the PHP that we're going to use is much more simple than the PHP in results by genre. All we're going to do is connect to the database using the same methods as we've used in previous scripts, and we're going to select the database, vinyl dealers, and run a query which simply selects every genre that's listed in our database. And I'm going to use a while loop to run through each of the rows in our result, and this is the part that's going to output to the HTML page and set up the select field. I'm going to use single quote to surround the option value, and we're going to use a double quote to break out of the string a concatenation symbol and the associative array record that we just defined in the previous line. We're going to pull genre ID from it. We need a concatenation symbol, double quote, single quote. The single quotes are to surround the option value, and we're going to close that tag, another double quote, and we'll need the name so that the user can see something to make the choice by. Now that may look a little confusing, quite a few symbols in there. Let's just save it, and we'll take a look at what it actually does in the browser. Now it's search-by-genre.php we want this time, and if we drop down the menu, we can see we have all these different options to choose from. So we're going to search for US Garage, and we get 2 results from our results-by-genre.php script. Now if we look at the source of this search by genre page, we can see that each of the options has been output in exactly the same way as they were on our static HTML page. So from this example, we can see that we can use PHP on both sides to make our search facility more flexible and self-updating every time we update the database. So far, all the interaction with the database has been one way. We've simply been taking information from the database and displaying it to the user. Now let's take a look at a way of taking information from the user and storing it on our database. We're going to build a small feedback collection form and a script to handle that feedback once it's input by the user. To begin with, I've added a new table to the MySQL database vinyl dealers. And that table is called feedback. And as we can see, there's an ID number, a username where the user can input their name, and a field where they can input their email. And then there's this spam field, which is going to be effectively Boolean. What I mean by that is it's either going to be a true value or a false value. And that, what it means is whether or not they're willing for us to send them details about our site and emails and so on at the address given above. Then there's a field where we can store the user's comments. Let's start work on our feedback HTML form. This is going to look quite similar to the other ones that we've made. This time the header is going to say feedback. We'll put a line break in there. Now we're going to need a form, similar to the last HTML forms that we made. And we're going to send this through to our PHP script. We better think of a name for that now. Let's call it send feedback. And we're going to use the post method to send that data. Let's save our We'll save onto our local host at the document root, and we're going to call this feedback.html. First item on our form is going to be the user's name. We're just going to have a normal text input, and it's going to be the user variable that we send, and we're going to specify a size for our field so that there's not going to be any problems when we try and put it into the database. And we're going to put another input in here. Let's leave a line break, and then this is going to be where they input their email address. And I left something off in this line, which is the type attribute, which is very important. And we're going to write very much the same thing here. And let's put 2 spaces in. And then we're going to have our option for being able to send more information with the user's permission to the email address that they gave us. We can deal with this, how we're going to do that at a later date. So we need to ask them the question, and then we need to, without any line breaks, we're going to put in 2 radio buttons. And we'll copy that line, and this one is going to give a value of 0. So as we can see, it's only 2 values that they're going to be able to use. And let's say we're going to have this item checked by default. That way the user, if they fail to make any changes, then they have tacitly agreed to receiving emails from us. Now, we'll need a field for their comments, which is the main point of this feedback form. And because this is a larger piece of text, we're going to use a text area field. And we're going to make that 60 columns wide. And let's say 10 columns in length, 10 rows in length rather. And this is going to be the comments field that we're sending. And notice that I've used all the same variable names as we're going to use for the names within our database. Now, you don't have to do that, but this is a very easy way of keeping track of where these pieces of data are supposed to be going. We should close our text area tag there, and then that's going to be our last piece of input. So we also need our submit button, which we'll also call submit, and then we can close our form. And there is our HTML page. Let's take a look at what that looks like. As we can see, there's our form. And although this looks a little large for the screen, that's not going to be a problem with any reasonable size resolution of a screen. The reason the screen is kept at 640 times 400 is for the purposes of making this training video. Most of your users are going to be using a larger screen resolution, so the size of our comments box is not going to be a problem. So that's that for that movie. In our next movie, we're going to develop the script that will deal with this information